Is there enough legal aid for women in distress and those affected by gender-based violence during this lockdown? And do women have enough legal access during this time? For more on this, I am joined by Seehaam Samaai, Director of Women's Legal Center. Seehaam, good evening and thank you for your time tonight. You are one of those organizations that said when you heard of the 17 million rand distributed by the Solidarity Fund, you said, well, civil society is missing in this distribution.
Yes, I mean, I think it's very important that whatever funds that have been allocated, whether or not it's in terms of the government or even the Solidarity Fund, it is important that it needs to be applied to the National Strategic Plan against violence against women and femicide. We all know last year that the President also brought in the state brought in an emergency plan, and I think that this is a pathway for the country to be able to ensure that we reduce gender-based violence and in particular violence against women and children. And this funding, like I've indicated, needs to be applied to the National Strategic Plan and those organizations that work also with the GBV Council to be able to ensure that there are support, prevention support, protective support, legal support for women on the ground.
Let's talk about the National Strategic Plan a little bit, especially during this time of a lockdown. Did we see an effective legal system with a legal framework, statute, procedural laws that provide access to justice, redress, protection, and compensation?
Well, the National Strategic Plan in itself, it came into effect it was adopted on the 30th of April with the emergency plan. But we all know the challenge with any strategic plan, policy, law is around implementation. And what we have seen with the COVID pandemic and the state's responses was that there is an unprecedented effect on the functioning of the justice system, and in particular, how women access justice during this particular time. We have seen the broader impact where the state has not been COVID ready for women to be able to access it. And these groups, which in particularly women and children, migrants, refugees, asylum seekers, have all been affected by the non-readiness of the court system. And this is very simple. What we have seen is that, for example, sexual offences matters that has been, for example, postponed. And there isn't timely hearings, which causes, for example, secondary victimization on victims. We've also seen that women that have tried to access the justice system that was turned back because of challenges within the system in itself. And although there are now possibly standard operating procedures and regulations in the Department of Justice, which is more the lower courts, and I'm not specifically talking about the higher courts, but the lower courts, I think it's very, very important that the state does some form of empowerment drive or some form of education to be able to ensure how women access the justice system in relation to sexual violations as well as matters relating to violence against women. One of the biggest challenges is women actually navigating the problems within communities to be able to even just get to court.
Yeah.
Getting through, getting on a taxi or to be able to get to the particular court, and it's been a major, major problem for them. So the socioeconomic inequalities is one of the major, major barriers for women also accessing justice during this particular time.
So but are we beginning to see some firm leadership, Seehaam, firm leadership on this particular issue and the strengthening of accountability? For example, with the National Strategic Plan now in place during this time of COVID-19, are there clear paths of responsibility? Do we know who do we hold accountable when things don't happen the way they're supposed to or the implementation is poor?
Well, I cannot overemphasize the importance of, the monitoring as well as the broader judicial oversight, especially around, the various emergency measures that the state is trying to contain. But at the end of the day, it has a disproportionate impact on women. And I have to again emphasize that many of the courts are not ready, is not COVID ready. We have clerks, etc., that doesn't have PPE wear. We have, for example, matters that are unnecessarily postponed and women not having access. And we need to be able to ensure whatever regulations do come in need to be partnered with some form of legal information to empower people and communities on what that particular processes are. Because it's exceptionally difficult for women to be able to get to a court and they are turned back.
Now, Seehaam, you see, my concern is that we find ourselves almost in the same place. Yes, the president will come, will make the speech, will note the victims by name, and he should, because that is very important. He will make a commitment of some more funds towards gender-based violence during a time of COVID-19. But it's the same announcements, the same movements that we made in 2019, yet we are still to sit down and say, did the plan that we implement in 2019 actually have any impact? Do we know? Are there statistics that tell us that amount of money, those courts that we built, the Tutuzela centers, the shelters that we provided, what is the impact and is it really working?
Well, we all know that these inequalities and these challenges were there before COVID. And what is now currently, what we have seen is that these challenges are now exacerbated because of the lockdown as well as COVID. And it, like I've indicated, it's always been there. And now it's more important for the state to ensure that we implement the regulations as well as the laws that are there. And it has become more important for the state to ensure that there is proper implementation. And what we have seen is that with the regulations, there hasn't been a broader gendered lens on these regulations and how it actually impacts. The response obviously has been a health response, but we say that it should have been a broader human rights response, which includes health as well as those rights which actually impact on women. And we don't see that. And so some of the issues that we have seen is that when women do come to court, they are unable to access because you have clerks, you have, for example, magistrates, you have those that are supposed to assist these women are not actually equipped to be able to deal with it. And the department, it is the responsibility of the department to come up with standard operating procedures in relation to what should happen with these matters at court. And that is what we have not yet seen. And this is not just broad regulations and broad policies. This is about what happens if a woman comes, what happens when you move into a particular court, and what the requirement is of those officials at the court. And we have not seen that. So there is a broader call in terms of implementation, because the issues, we know that with regard to the impact and the challenges of COVID, it's not going to be for the next 2 months or during the period of the lockdown. It's going to be with us for some period, because the poor and the working class, and in particularly women, have been disproportionately impacted by the lack of implementation as well as very specific operational procedures, which is not at the court. We don't even have court.
Would that lack of implementation be linked in any way with a lack of awareness, a lack of sensitivity amongst the professionals and the officials?
Well, I do think that it's on various levels, because you can't just shift. The most important thing in terms of the National Strategic Plan also is to be able to shift broader behavior within our court system, because we all know that the courts, even prior to COVID, it's very hard. It's a system that has always worked against women. And how do we change that? And I think it's important that the state look at the NSP and see how it can actually be implemented, because most of the socioeconomic challenges have been addressed also within the strategic plan. And it's about proper budgeting, and it's about proper implementation, and it's also about having those procedures and in broader empowerment to be able to ensure that people know what is going on.
That means good coordination then of existing structures so that you avoid the duplication of what, for example, your organization is doing and what needs to be happening in the entire system. Are we going to see that? Are we moving closer to that kind of coordination?
Well, we have engaged with different departments, in particularly also the Department of Justice, around this particular issue, because we have seen, especially in level 3, with the lifting of some of the regulations, etc., we know that there has been an increase, and let me be very clear on this. There has been an increase in possible reporting, but we all know that during level 5 and in terms of level 4, there has been an increase, even though there hasn't been an increase in reporting possibly, of gender violence against women and children, and those that, and how do we deal with that? Because there will be now a greater increase of women moving into public spaces, etc. And we know that now that they would what they call more your stranger type of sexual violations that will also now increase. And how will the state be dealing with that? And when we have the regulations that have now been lifted, we also have women trying to navigate themselves out of the home. And when we see the impact of that psychologically, and we do know that women have now also broader access because they can move outside of the house and either move towards a friend or try to get a colleague, or they will be able to now contact organizations like the Women's Legal Center, or even other public interest organizations.
Right.
And because of that, there has been an increase, and the state and the courts are not equipped to be able to deal with that.
Right. Seehaam, appreciate your time. Thank you very much for joining us. Seehaam Samaai, Director at the Women's Legal Center, with us tonight.